She was just 8 years old when she vanished into the night, plucked from her bedroom while her little sister lay sleeping nearby. No screams, no signs of struggle, no forced entry. Just a cracked window, a drop of blood, and the hollow silence of a child no longer there. What followed was a nightmare that would span nearly 2 decades, twist the heart of a grieving mother, and finally bring justice through a miracle of science. This is not just a mystery, it's a mother's cry into the void. It's the haunting story of a child taken, a case gone cold, and the relentless hunt to bring her home. Welcome back to Dark Case Files, where we explore the most haunting true crime stories from around the world. Stories of lives stolen, justice delayed, and truth buried deep until someone dares to dig them up. If you believe these stories matter, if you think every victim deserves to be heard, take a moment to subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, but it means everything to us. Your support helps us keep these cases alive and bring new ones to light. Kirsten Dawn Hatfield was born on February 12, 1989, in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Her mother, Shannon Hazen, was only 18 when she held Kirsten for the first time, a baby, with bright eyes and soft, strawberry blonde curls. Shannon's relationship with Kirsten's father crumbled shortly after Kirsten's birth, and with nowhere else to go, she moved back into her parents' small, modest home. It was there, in the safety of her grandparents' arms, that Kirsten spent her earliest years. Those years were simple, but full of love. Shannon worked when she could, leaning on her parents when she couldn't. Her father, a quiet man of few words, taught Kirsten how to fish. Her mother, loving and stern, made sure the little girl was always clean, fed, and kissed goodnight. Despite financial hardship, Kirsten was always cared for. When Kirsten was 2, Shannon found the strength to move out on her own. She remarried and gave birth to another daughter, Faith. But happiness was fleeting. The marriage ended in divorce, leaving Shannon once again as a single mother. Now, raising 2 daughters, she moved into a small duplex in a working-class neighborhood. Life wasn't easy, money was tight, but the girls had each other, and that mattered more than anything. Kirsten and Faith were inseparable. Kirsten, just 5 years older, became a second mother to her baby sister. She would braid her hair, soothe her when she cried, and even sing to her at night. Kirsten was precocious, the kind of child who seemed older than her years. Her teachers said she was quiet but brilliant, always polite, always engaged. Neighbors remembered her as shy but sweet, never demanding attention, never making a fuss. She loved stories. She'd get lost in books, disappearing into imagined worlds. Her favorite game was playing teacher to Faith, using a cardboard box as a makeshift blackboard. There was something deeply maternal in her, even as a little girl, an inner stillness that made people pause. She radiated a quiet wisdom, as if she somehow knew the world could be cruel, but she chose kindness anyway. That kind of light doesn't just vanish, it leaves a shadow. May 13th, 1997 was unremarkable in every way. The Oklahoma air was warm, thick with the promise of summer. Shannon had tucked her daughters into bed like she always did, Faith in her crib, Kirsten in the bottom bunk. She gave them each a kiss, pulled the door almost closed, and stepped away. She would never see Kirsten alive again. Sometime during the night, Shannon awoke with a start. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was a mother's intuition. Maybe something stirred. She noticed the girl's bedroom door was shut. Odd, she always left it ajar. She opened it quietly and checked on them. Faith was still in her crib, asleep. Everything looked normal. Kirsten's blanket looked like it had just been rustled. Maybe she had gotten up to use the bathroom. Shannon checked the hallway, the bathroom. No Kirsten. By 6:30 a.m., panic set in. Shannon tore through the house, screaming her daughter's name. She checked closets under the bed, the backyard, the neighbor's house, every inch of her world. Nothing, just emptiness. She called her father in desperation. "Is she there?" she asked, voice cracking. "Did she come over?" "No," he said, confused. "Why would she?" That was when Shannon called the police. Midwest City officers arrived quickly, but what they found chilled them. The window in Kirsten's bedroom, just feet from where Faith had been sleeping, was cracked open. The screen had been removed. On the windowsill, smears of blood. In the yard below, a pair of bloodied underwear. It was Kirsten's. There was no forced entry, no broken glass. Whoever had taken Kirsten knew what they were doing. This wasn't a chaotic crime. It was methodical, calculated. Detectives immediately ruled out the possibility of a runaway. Kirsten was 8 years old. She didn't have shoes. She had no reason to flee. And that blood told a different story. A much darker one. The community erupted. Helicopters flew overhead. Police combed through storm drains and wooded patches. Search dogs tracked every possible scent. Dive teams searched nearby creeks. Door-to-door canvassing swept through the neighborhood. One neighbor recalled their dog barking wildly around 3 a.m. Another said they'd seen a flashlight beam in their backyard. But no one saw Kirsten. No one heard her scream. It was as if she had been stolen by a ghost. Investigators turned to the only potential witness, 3-year-old Faith. When gently asked if she remembered anything, Faith whispered 6 devastating words. "A bad man took my sister." That was it. No name, no description. Just the vaguest truth from the smallest voice. And that single sentence became the only eyewitness testimony in the case. As in many cases, the spotlight turned to the family. Shannon's history was scrutinized. She had a past marked by struggle, including previous drug use. The media hinted, the public speculated. Had she been negligent? Was she hiding something? Police looked hard, but they found nothing. No motive, no evidence. Shannon passed multiple polygraph tests. Her grief was raw, real. Still, the cloud of suspicion lingered. It always does. Desperate for help, Shannon formed a volunteer group to keep Kirsten's name in the public eye. They printed flyers, held vigils, and pleaded with the community. But even this brought betrayal. Some volunteers used the case for attention. Others stole donated money. Shannon was exploited again and again, but refused to stop. "I'm her mother," she told one reporter. "I have to believe she's out there." That belief would fuel her for years. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months, months to years, and still, no Kirsten. By the summer of 1998, the posters had begun to yellow. The tip lines grew quiet. The news stations stopped calling. Even the volunteers, once so passionate, moved on with their lives. But Shannon Hazen couldn't. She was frozen in the moment her daughter disappeared. The hardest part wasn't the not knowing. It was the way the world kept spinning, as if nothing had happened. Shannon would find herself standing in grocery store aisles, staring at strawberry yogurt, Kirsten's favorite. She couldn't bring herself to buy it, couldn't bring herself to leave it either. She stopped celebrating birthdays, stopped decorating for holidays. The home that once echoed with bedtime songs and little girl giggles became a tomb of memory, and Faith, who had shared that bedroom with her sister, grew up haunted by silence. Her early memories were tangled in trauma. How does a 3-year-old process the loss of her best friend, the person who braided her hair and read her stories? Faith developed night terrors. She'd wake up screaming, convinced the bad man had come back. Every so often the phone would ring, a tip, a sighting, a psychic vision. Shannon would drop everything, but every lead led nowhere. The hope rose like a tide and crashed just as fast. Behind the scenes, Midwest City Police never gave up, but resources were limited and leads were scarce. The case was passed from detective to detective. Files grew thicker, but not deeper. Evidence collected at the scene sat in storage, sealed in plastic bags. Blood samples, fingerprints, and a swab from Kirsten's underwear. But it was 1997. DNA testing was still in its infancy, expensive and often inconclusive. By 2000, the case was officially classified as cold. That word, cold, cut like a knife. Cold meant forgotten. Cold meant unsolved. Cold meant Kirsten was just another statistic in a sea of missing children. Shannon refused to let that happen. She wrote letters to lawmakers, begging for more support. She joined online forums, connecting with other parents of missing kids. She kept a candle in her window every night. She refused to move. She refused to change Kirsten's room. The bed remained made, the stuffed animals untouched. She was stuck in a purgatory between hope and grief. As the early 2000s brought advances in forensic science, hope flickered again. DNA databases were growing. CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, was becoming more widely used. Police departments across the country were solving cold cases decades old. In 2005, Midwest City detectives submitted the DNA evidence from Kirsten's case into CODIS. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. The result? Nothing. No match. It was a punch to the gut. Shannon wept in her car outside the police station. Another dead end. She tried to rebuild, for faith, for herself. She began speaking publicly about child abduction and the trauma of not knowing. Her words were raw and honest. She didn't sugarcoat her grief. She talked about suicidal thoughts, about isolation, about how losing a child is like losing a part of your soul, but being forced to keep breathing anyway. People listened. Mothers cried with her. Law enforcement respected her resolve. Shannon wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. She became an advocate, but inside, she still carried a wound that wouldn't heal. The neighborhood where Kirsten had vanished also changed over time. People moved, new families came, others passed away. But one man stayed, a man named Anthony Palma. To the casual observer, Palma was unremarkable. He worked a steady job, lived a quiet life, paid his bills, kept to himself. What few remembered was that Palma had lived just 2 doors down from Kirsten's duplex in 1997. He had been interviewed during the initial investigation, but nothing about him stood out at the time. No criminal record, no suspicious behavior, just a quiet neighbor. But that silence was hiding something. In 2015, the Midwest City Police Department formed a new cold case unit. The idea was to revisit the evidence with fresh eyes and new technology. A young investigator named Jimmy Williams was assigned to Kirsten's case. He spent weeks combing through the old files, reading every interview, analyzing every piece of evidence. One detail caught his attention. Back in 1997, Palma had told detectives he barely knew the family. But Shannon remembered differently. She said Palma had come over multiple times to help with odd jobs, fixing a door, moving furniture. Kirsten had been there. She would have known him, trusted him. That inconsistency raised flags. Detective Williams decided to take a bold step. He requested a new DNA analysis of the blood and semen collected from Kirsten's underwear, this time using advanced testing techniques unavailable in the 90s. The sample was run through CODIS again. What came back was astonishing. There was a match. Anthony Palma. After 18 years of silence, science had spoken. The man who had lived 2 doors down, the man who had said he barely knew Kirsten. His DNA was found on the very underwear that had been discovered in the yard after her disappearance. It was the break the case had desperately needed, but it wasn't over. Investigators had to tread carefully. They began surveilling Palma, gathering current DNA samples from things he discarded. Coffee cups, napkins, cigarette butts. Every single one confirmed the match. The evidence was airtight. On September 29, 2015, Anthony Palma was arrested and charged with the kidnapping and murder of Kirsten Hatfield. The community, which had nearly forgotten the case, was stunned. Shannon Hazen, now in her 40s, was shaking when she heard the news. She had dreamed of this moment for years, and now it was here. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like opening an old wound and realizing it still bled. As Palma sat in jail awaiting trial, the prosecution prepared for a fierce legal battle. There was no body, no confession, only the DNA and the mountain of circumstantial evidence. But it was enough. Shannon steeled herself for testimony. She would face the man who had stolen her daughter, stolen her life. She would look him in the eyes and ask the question that had haunted her for nearly 2 decades. Why? But she never got the chance. On January 11, 2018, Anthony Palma was found dead in his prison cell. He had been beaten and strangled by his cellmate. There would be no trial, no answers, no confession, just silence. When Shannon learned of Palma's death, her reaction was not what people expected. How I think she should be seen as just this beautiful soul who lives on. I have been praying for Anthony Palma for a very long time now, even before, back since he was nameless and faceless. Obviously, it just came with a lot of emotions, just a ton of emotions and a ton of questions. I'm not celebrating Anthony Palma's murder. I'm not celebrating that. And I actually am praying for his family. I'm just not going to give up hope that just because he's gone means that we are not going to get any more answers. Palma had taken her daughter, and now he'd taken the chance for justice too. But one thing he couldn't take was the truth. He did it. And now, the world knew. In the quiet house where Shannon Hazen still lived, the air remained heavy. The same curtains hung in the windows. Kirsten's room, though faded by time, remained mostly untouched, her name still stenciled on the door, her favorite stuffed bear still propped neatly on the bed. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was haunted. Though Anthony Palma was gone, beaten to death in a prison cell by another inmate in 2018, the shadow he cast never truly left. There was no satisfaction in his death, no courtroom drama, no confession, no map pointing to where Kirsten's body lay. He had taken the most crucial answer with him into the grave. Where is she? This was the cruelest part for Shannon. She had spent years imagining what she might say if she ever faced the man who took her daughter. She had prepared herself to read a victim impact statement in court to deliver the anguish he had caused. She wanted him to look her in the eyes. She wanted to see him shrink in the presence of a mother's rage. Instead, he died in the same silence with which he stole Kirsten away. And Kirsten? She never came home. Even after Palma's death, Shannon didn't stop. She turned her efforts toward recovering Kirsten's remains. Police, with renewed interest, launched additional searches in areas near Palma's old home. Cadaver dogs were deployed. Excavations were quietly carried out in nearby woods and fields. But no body was found, not even a bone. Experts believe Palma may have disposed of Kirsten's body in a place so secluded or so mundane that it simply blended into the landscape of forgotten things. Garbage bins, construction sites, riverbeds. The terrifying truth is, in America, hundreds of missing children are never found, even when their killers are caught. To this day, Kirsten's remains have never been located. For Shannon, that means no headstone, no place to leave flowers, no final goodbye, just a room, just a memory, just a daughter stolen into the dark, never brought back to light. Faith Hatfield, now an adult, carries the kind of scar that doesn't show in photographs. She was only 3 when the trauma hit, but trauma leaves a fingerprint on the psyche that no amount of therapy can fully erase. For years, she struggled with feelings she couldn't name: survivor's guilt, chronic anxiety, abandonment. She grew up in a house shaped by absence. While other girls argued with their sisters about clothes and curfews, Faith's sister was a name in newspaper articles, a face on a missing poster, a ghost in her childhood bedroom. She once said in an interview, "It felt like I was raised in the ruins of someone else's tragedy." Faith eventually moved away to start her own life. She's not publicly outspoken like her mother, but the pain is there, in every quiet pause, every protective instinct, every look she gives to her own children. She raises them with a fierceness born from loss. She never got to say goodbye, and that, she says, is the part that still stings the most. In the wake of Palma's arrest and death, the case received renewed media attention. National outlets picked up the story, documentaries were made, true crime podcasts debated every theory and every timeline. Twitter threads spun webs of speculation. Some celebrated the power of DNA. Others criticized the system for taking 18 years to act. But behind every headline was a family shattered by time. Shannon often spoke about the strange violation of having her pain turned into content. "People would recognize me in the store," she said, and they'd ask, "Are you the mom?" Like I was part of a TV show, like I wasn't a real person. She knew the attention helped. It kept Kirsten's story alive, but it also meant her trauma was never allowed to settle. It was constantly reopened, dissected, commented on, judged. Still, she showed up, for every interview, every vigil, every chance to speak her daughter's name into a world that had almost forgotten her. In the end, it was not a detective's intuition or a tip from the public that cracked the case. It was a molecule. DNA, microscopic threads of identity, told the story Kirsten could not. A single swab, stored in a plastic bag for nearly 2 decades, carried her truth. It lived silently in evidence storage until science grew strong enough to unlock it. This is the dual nature of modern justice. The failures of the system and the miracles of innovation often walk hand in hand. The same system that let Kirsten's case go cold for 18 years is the one that solved it in the end. And in that truth lies a lesson. Kirsten Dawn Hatfield was more than a case, more than a mystery, more than a name in a file. She was a real child with freckles on her cheeks and songs in her heart. She was a sister, a daughter, a friend. Her favorite movie was The Lion King. Her favorite food was macaroni and cheese. She loved to pretend she was a teacher, writing on pretend chalkboards to an imaginary classroom. She was 8 years old, and she mattered. Her story reminds us that behind every headline is a human life interrupted. Her case shows the devastating ripple effect one violent act can have, not just on the victim, but on entire families, entire communities. And her legacy lives on in every advance in forensic technology, in every parent who double-checks the locks at night, in every cold case detective who refuses to give up. As we close this chapter, we are left with a haunting question. What would Kirsten have become? Would she have been a teacher, a poet, a mother? We will never know. And that is the true tragedy. Not only the loss of a child, but the loss of everything she might have been. Her killer may be gone, but Kirsten's memory remains, etched into the hearts of those who knew her, and now into those who know her story. If you were moved by Kirsten's story, let her name be more than a whisper from the past. Share it, speak it, keep her light alive, and ask yourself, how many more children are out there, still waiting for justice? We live in a world where monsters sometimes wear familiar faces, but we also live in a world where science can speak for the voiceless, and where mothers can carry their fight across decades. Kirsten Hatfield's story is not just about loss, it's about love, about resilience, about never giving up. If this story resonated with you, join the conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more deep dives into the cases that shape our world, and remind us why justice matters. Because sometimes justice doesn't come quickly, but it can come, even after 18 years, even from a drop of blood, even in the silence.